Hello everyone, my name is Japjit Dhingra. Today I'll be talking to you about J. Willard Gibbs and his contributions to science in America. So Willard Gibbs, Josiah Willard Gibbs was born in New Haven, and he spent most of his life in New Haven, surrounding Yale University specifically. He was born to a Yale professor of sacred languages, and he grew up in New Haven, and then went to Yale for both undergrad and graduate school. And he was very studious and intellectually curious. He would eventually die in New Haven in 1903. During graduate school and at Yale, he was awarded America's first PhD in engineering on his thesis on the form of teeth of wheels in spur gearing. So clearly, his PhD thesis, was more focused on a mechanical engineering side of science, and so clearly his interests evolved as he grew older. We know that Gibbs is the same Gibbs as in like Gibbs free energy or the Gibbs-Duhem equation, and these equations and terms are more on the thermodynamics slash chemistry side of things. So how did he get through this transition? Um, After his PhD, his parents died, and so him and his older sisters went to Europe after their death. And in Europe, Gibbs was exposed to a lot of very popular and very impactful European scientists, and sort of was inspired by them and learned a lot from them and how they approached science and discovery. Those three main influence on him was uh, Kirchhoff, responsible for like the circuit laws, Bunsen, the Bunsen burner, and Maxwell with Maxwell's equations. So he left mechanical engineer and returned a physicist and a chemist. After returning to New Haven, he became a professor of mathematical physics in Yale in 1871, and he would go on to produce very major works in these areas of thermodynamics and physical chemistry. Um, Interestingly, for the first 9 years of his time at Yale, he worked unpaid until Johns Hopkins eventually offered him a position with a salary. So then Yale had to counteroffer, but Yale actually offered him a lower salary than Johns Hopkins offered him, but he decided to stay at Yale anyways, maybe for the environment or because he loved New Haven so much. This was his lab at Yale University, or the building his lab was in, or his office, because he was he did theory, but yes. So Gibbs' first major work was published 7 years later in 1878, and it was a 300-page long paper that sort of brought a bunch of disparate phenomena together into the envelope of thermodynamics, using some equations he developed and building off of the first and second laws, which were only really brought into like thought of in this time. So it was very recent and very cohesive, like bringing together of um, work in the past, such as the first and second law, and applying it to a bunch of different systems and showing that all these different things are all just thermodynamics, which is really cool in my opinion. It starts with equations like these, like the fundamental equations of thermodynamics, which essentially states that the internal energy is a function of the entropy based on the temperature, is a function of volume based on the pressure, and a function of the chemical potential depending on the amount of each species. So these different aspects are are responsible for the energy of a system in terms of like how much the movement of the particles is and how many different configurations they can take with this entropy term, the physical space that the matter is taking up, and the chemistry of the matter in terms of the chemical potential and the amount of species. So together with this framework, he derived many different like governing equations for many different like processes that were previously thought to be like completely unrelated to each other, such as reaction equilibria. You have your Gibbs free energy, which we all know and love in the science world, and how this connects to a reaction equilibrium constant. You have the phase rule, which sort of tells you the degrees of freedoms in a phase diagram based on the amount of uh, the amount of compounds and the amount of phases. You have osmosis, which tells you the osmotic pressure one way or another based on the solute concentration difference and the temperature. And this is, of course, a governing equation for processes like reverse osmosis and water purification, and a lot of cellular processes that rely on osmosis. And lastly, electrochemistry, a quick modification of this first equation up here to like looking at the electromotive force and the charge instead of the chemical potential can connect you quite clearly to the Gibbs free energy of a reaction to the potential of an electrochemical cell that functions off of that reaction, which is very important for like batteries and fuel cells. So he clearly did a lot of work in a lot of different fields and integrated a lot of things together with this paper. And of course, it's like referred to as like the Bible of thermodynamics in a sense because of this. His second major work was in 1902, which he did in statistical mechanics. And this work was sort of in collaboration or building off of Maxwell and Boltzmann's work in the field, and it was corresponded to a shift in thinking about at least chemistry. That instead of being able to think about chemistry deterministically because of just the amount of molecules in a system, you have to move to a statistical perspective and almost treat them as if they're a bunch of different people. Um, and so because of that, like you get equations like this, which are, you're saying that the entropy is a summation over all these different microstates in a system and the probability of their occurrence. He also worked, and this also directly leads to other statistical mechanical equations and the ideas of like partition functions and stuff like that, which can build like macro thermodynamics quantities from the actual like microscopic statistical nature and phenomena. So another aspect of this work that he looked at was ensembles. Now, ensembles are just essentially ways of thinking of these different like toy systems or like problems that you can sort of like simplify the world in a sense and like reduce it to this sort of problem and see how can we treat this and how can we affect like the main thermodynamic variables in each of these different cases, and they sort of like differently model different systems, and they're very well used in computational chemistry and a lot of like molecular dynamics sort of applications today. They are very quite centrally involved in molecular dynamics. So the three different like main ensembles are the microcanonical, the canonical, and the grand canonical ensembles. But there are a lot of others. Essentially, they revolve around what variables are held constant and what like aspects of the boundary are open or closed. So in a microcanonical ensemble, essentially everything is closed. You have constant volume, you have constant energy, and you have constant amount of substances. In a canonical ensemble, you relax your constant energy and allow it to equilibrate like thermally with some environment, and thus you have a constant temperature regime. In the grand canonical ensemble, you relax the constant amount of moles, and you can equilibrate with essentially reservoirs of different chemicals, and this sort of allows you to treat like reaction equilibria or stuff like that. And this is a due, and it maintains constant chemical potential, um, so it's in some sort of like chemical equilibrium when compared instead of like just a constant amount of moles. So now, in terms of his character and how he was regarded during his life, his colleagues all described him as a very kind man and very focused on just his research and his science. He sort of wasn't really interested in like promoting himself or any ego involved with the science. He didn't have much personal ambition, or he didn't really care much about his personal renown as long as he made a good science and like learned about the world. So this was very much like mirroring his personality in childhood, and this sort of he never really did get in like fame in his time. for his science. His works weren't published in a very frequently read journal, even though the journal was scientifically very rigorous. And a lot of his work was very cryptic, it's been described as, or very like mathematical and very like it takes like a person's understanding of the math for granted in some sense and doesn't make conclusions super clear. Um, and so it took a long time for people to truly understand like the impact that he had and the work that he did. Um, and this sort of came into his scientific legacy when people did actually understand his impact and his work. Um, uh, they he won the Copley Prize like right before he died, which is a predecessor to the Nobel. It was a British prize, and a lot of famous like scientists and philosophers after his death that didn't exist during his time described him very favorably. For instance, Einstein described him as the greatest mind in American history. Planck regarded him as among the most renowned theoretical physicists of all time. So Gibbs truly was a testament to the power of genuine curiosity and seeking like the truth of the world around us, instead of like any material sense of accomplishment. He was very much focused on the like the beauty of the science, which I think is very cool. So yeah, that was J. Willard Gibbs. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, you can of course leave a comment below. Thank you.